England's decision to deny Maduro officials' withdrawal request comes after the U.S. government lobbied their UK counterparts to help in cutting off Venezuela's overseas assets. Venezuelan opposition leader and self-declared president Juan Guaido has asked British authorities to stop President Nicolas Maduro from gaining access to his government's gold reserves. Guaido sent a letter to UK Prime Minister Theresa May and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney. I am writing to ask you to stop this illegitimate transaction. If the money is transferred, it will be used by the illegitimate and kleptocratic regime of Nicolas Maduro to repress and brutalize the Venezuelan people. Maduro has been renounced by several Western nations and U.S. allies in Latin America who accuse him of undermining democracy. Many others, however, including China and Russia, oppose what they have called a coup. Others, like Mexico, are calling for non-interference and de-escalation. Now, to ease Venezuela's economic crisis after rounds of U.S. sanctions, Maduro's government has been attempting to withdraw the roughly 16.5 tons of gold, worth about $550 million, since last year, that is. The head of Venezuela's central bank traveled to London in mid-December to seek access to the gold, but the talks were unsuccessful. And last week, Reuters reported that Venezuela's gold at the Bank of England has more than doubled to about 31 tons. That's about $1.2 billion. All this after Venezuela did a gold deal with Deutsche Bank. The Bank of England spokeswoman said the bank doesn't comment on specific relationships. They're subject to customer confidentiality. They fear Venezuela officials might take the state gold for personal gain.
It's theft, it's brigandry, it's piracy, and a useful reminder to everyone that the last place in the world you should trust with your gold, with your money, is perfidious Albion and its bank, and I hope that other world leaders take note of that. This is coming from the very same people crying crocodile tears for poverty in Venezuela. They're telling us that people are hungry in Venezuela while stealing Venezuela's money, which could have fed them.
Guaido took to Twitter and took the Bank of England's refusal to release the gold as a big win. The process of protecting the assets of Venezuela has begun. We will not allow more abuse and theft of money intended for food, medicine, and the future of our children. We also saw a similar situation after the ouster of the Libyan leader Gaddafi back in 2011, when a U.S.-led coalition froze Libyan government assets in Western banks, that with the help of UN sanctions. But a debate continues to this day over who exactly had access to the reserves and the millions of dollars in interest that it yielded per year. So as the battle over Venezuela continues, clashes such as the one we're seeing at the Bank of England will become key in determining whether the Maduro government will have the resources it needs to stay in office, or if Guaido and his allies abroad will succeed in forcing the government to step down.
For more, we go to investigative journalist Ben Swan. Ben, thank you for joining us on this breaking news story. So what is the significance of Mnuchin saying that the $1.2 billion in gold will be available just to Guaido?
Right, so obviously the significance there is this attempt to really kind of overthrow Maduro in a way that we have not seen the U.S. Do in the Middle East. It seems like there's a kind of a new tactic that's being used here. In the past, we've seen these fake kind of Arab Spring uprisings and then a military solution, no-fly zones, and then arming rebels. In this case, it's a little bit different. We're seizing essentially the gold that belongs to Venezuela and saying we're not going to allow Maduro to have access to it. And then, of course, the sanctions on the oil to say we're not going to give him access to that. So there's an attempt here to starve him out somewhat, but I also think if you really look at some of the wording that's being used, it sounds like there is a recognition by the U.S. that the military in Venezuela is swayed by whoever controls the gold and controls the oil in order to pay the military, and this would be their method or their lever by which to get control of that military power, which so far has said it's backing Maduro.
Ben, do you find it to be alarming that the U.S. is threatening basically an offensive regime, a change on another country that has not actually officially attacked the United States directly? Is this opening up Pandora's box for future foreign policy?
I don't know if it opens up a Pandora's box for future foreign policy. I think it's more of the same foreign policy that we've been seeing now for the last 3 decades. I mean, what's incredible here is that the U.S. has these continued policies of wanting to overthrow governments and regimes around the world that we don't agree with, and our track record, Scotty, on this is so terrible. We have a horrific track record because we wind up creating vacuums of power that are then filled. We say, well, there's a strong man who's in control now and it couldn't get worse, and then it gets worse. And we saw it happen so many times in the Middle East. There's no reason to think that it wouldn't happen here as well. I'm not saying an ISIS takes over Venezuela, but I am saying we have a terrible track record of overthrowing these governments and then leaving behind a worse situation than what was there before.
Well, we also have a worse track record of when we do put these sanctions in place, it doesn't actually affect the government, those in control. It actually affects the people that are already hurting, those that are on the ground, the main street. What kind of effect is these sanctions going to have on those folks?
Always. Listen, Ron Paul, the former congressman from Texas, has a saying. He says sanctions are essentially, harming only poor people in countries. They don't harm the rich people, the powerful people who are in those places. And it's absolutely true. If you look at the historical data around sanctions hurt the working class in those countries, and it hurts the poor in those countries. And the wealthy and the powerful who have their stockpiles of money are not affected by sanctions. This is a great example of that. Obviously, Venezuela depends immensely on its oil reserves and oil, harming only poor people in countries. They don't harm the rich people, the powerful people who are in those places. And it's absolutely true. If you look at the historical data around sanctions hurt the working class in those countries, and it hurts the poor in those countries. And the wealthy and the powerful who have their stockpiles of money are not affected by sanctions. This is a great example of that. Obviously, Venezuela depends immensely on its oil reserves and oil production in order to be able to make money. Now, Mnuchin tries to soften that today by saying, well, we'll still buy oil from the Venezuelan people if they can guarantee that that money for that will go into some kind of blocked account that Maduro doesn't have access to. How would the people be able to do that? How would the people of Venezuela be able to set up secure accounts that the government of Venezuela can't access or seize in some way? So it's a very strange statement. It sounds to me like they're essentially saying, we're going to buy the oil and we're going to funnel the money to the leadership like Guaido, that we want to have that money. That's what it sounds like the U.S. is doing. And again, in order to do that, you've got to have support from the Saudis and the Middle East, because you need them to increase oil production so that American drivers don't feel it, because if they feel it, all of a sudden they don't like this plan anymore. And then you have to have the help of other countries around the world as well to give support to this idea.
Well, that's the thing. You look at what's going on right now with the Bank of England saying that they're going to hold on, that they're going to freeze Venezuelan money, the Venezuelan gold right now, so that it does not go to Maduro, but they'll give it to the other. The problem with this is that not say down the road, yes, in this case it's who supposedly the United States is siding with, but does it not make it kind of odd that a country can pick and choose who they want to give money back to at their request?
Well, I think it's extremely odd. I mean, I think another word for that would be theft, right? Anytime a country or a bank is holding your money and says, I refuse to give it to you, I'm going to give it to someone else who I think is the actual rightful holder of this money. Keep in mind, people are already forgetting, Guaido is the head of the National Assembly. We've talked about this on your show before. He's the head of the National Assembly. The Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution says that he becomes interim president if the current president has been usurping power, but only until fair elections can be held. The way the U.S. is setting this up, they are pushing Guaido into power. Why would you give him access to gold, oil, and the nation's wealth and expect that he would then step down after elections are held? Isn't he just going to assume power himself at some point? And if he does, then you have another case of a U.S.-backed strongman taking control of another country.
Well, this is just beginning. We're going to see how this develops, but obviously it's the U.S. getting involved in an election, and like I said, they have not directly attacked us. We've got a lot of other issues that we're dealing with right now around the world. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Gabby.
For more on the impact of this move by the Bank of England and what it could mean for the future stability of Venezuela, we're joined by Hillary Fordwich, founder of Strellmark LLC. Thanks for joining us, Hillary.
Pleasure, Scotty.
Okay, so what do you make of the UK refusing to allow Venezuela to withdraw the $1.2 billion in gold that has been stored in Great Britain?
Well, first of all, it's a freeze, and it's not refusing to, it's a freeze at the moment. So there's no, we're not going to. It's due to the current circumstances. So I think in terms of the circumstances, what's important to remember is although Maduro was theoretically elected last May, he claims it was legitimate 20 nations, including 11 in Latin America, came out against that, and including the EU. So it was not a legitimate election. They warned him, and he was warned by many, including the Prime Minister in Canada, not to assume the presidency on January 10th, but he went ahead and did so. So he's assumed a presidency that was illegitimate. And that's where, obviously, Juan has come in and has said, you heard him saying that he knows it's going to be used for illegitimate sources. He has assumed the presidency of the National Assembly that is democratically elected, and that's what the nation wants. I think you're seeing this rise up against an awful dictator who has left this nation in tremendous amount of poverty. And in terms of the Bank of England, if the Bank of England release that money now, they would be reckless because it wouldn't go to feed those children. Now, the other thing I would say, though, is would you or I like it if we went to our bank and they said, Scotty, Hillary, you've been a little bit naughty this afternoon, we're not going to give you your money. But I think in this instance, we're looking at international principles. And again, it's not that they're refusing to release it, it is that it is frozen in the interim by the request of a democratically elected National Assembly leader.
Okay, so when this, first of all, a lot of people are going, wait a minute, why is Venezuela putting its gold in Britain anyways? Just like this is normal for a lot of countries do store their gold and other resources in
and
other
particularly
countries.
the UK, and that's why it's one of the banking capital basically of the world.
So when they're filling out the documentation, they're signing forms, it's kind of like you and I when we go open up a checking account. This person can sign to get money or not. Maduro's name probably is on there, so do you think there's a clause you can read?
But I bet you're right, Scotty, I bet it's his name, but it says president. Well, he was not elected legitimately. That is the contention here. And that is why the president of the National Assembly, Guaido, has taken over.
But now Maduro, as well as those that are his supporters, would say, but that's the opinion that's going on right now. That's the opinion the world's having. At this time, though, going into it, he has the name as the president. I mean, it's either or. Does that mean that the opposition can go in and take this money out then?
Well, I think that it's global pressure. That's what you're seeing. You're not just seeing the U.S., and this is not a U.S.-led coup. This is the EU, 11 other Latin American nations, and 20 nations altogether. That doesn't even include the U.S. So I think what you're seeing is global pressure and global disgust at what's happening to the people there. And if you have one of the people saying, we know where that money will go if you're being released, I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of the Bank of England having to make that decision. And they've just frozen the assets right now.
Okay, that's the question. Where would the money go? What would Maduro do with these dollars right now if he was able to have access to them?
Well, I can tell you where it wouldn't go, and that would be to his people, because if he cared about his people wouldn't be literally starving. There isn't running water, and toilet paper is considered a luxury right now in Venezuela. And that is what's caused actually some of this mass migration out of South America, northward, even into Mexico, and of course into the US. So that's what we know he would not do with it. I can't personally speak or tell you what he would do with it, but I think globally the contention is, and the concern is, that it would go to nefarious objectives, such as maybe the military, although the military sounds like they actually are on Juan Guaido's side. I think that it probably might even go directly into the hands of Maduro for his use.
Well, that's going into it, the U.S. obviously has played a role in this.
Yes.
What if the U.S., the UK, if everybody had just stayed out of it and let Venezuela handle it within themselves, do you think Britain would have taken these steps, or the UK would have taken these steps and held on to the gold?
I think it is global pressure. I don't think just from the US, though. I think it's also, look at what's happening with Brexit. I think it's also pressure from the EU. I think it's global pressure.
Isn't that kind of interesting though, that here Brexit's having their own problems, Britain's having their own problems, and yet they're still refusing to give money over.
Well, they're not refusing.
They're freezing at this stage.
They're freezing it at this juncture, because don't forget, this is a democratically elected National Assembly leader who's requesting that they don't. It's not that they're refusing it to the nation of Venezuela. They're acting on the request of the nationally elected democratic leader.
There's definitely two sides to this story, and we'll definitely see how this plays out. Thanks for joining us,
You're welcome, Scotty. Pleasure.
Hey, YouTube. Thanks for